My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. Living in my modest one-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old car, my family thinks I'm the failure of our wealthy dynasty. Little do they know that beneath my simple clothes and unassuming lifestyle lies a secret. I own more property than all of them combined. At our annual family conference, when Uncle Richard called me poor in front of everyone, I finally decided enough was enough. Before I continue with what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing your ground when everyone underestimates you. I grew up surrounded by luxury and expectations. The Mitchell family name carried weight in financial circles, with our family tree sprouting bankers, investors, and corporate executives across 3 generations. My childhood home was a sprawling colonial with 6 bedrooms, a tennis court, and staff quarters that my parents filled with people who cooked our meals and tended our gardens. Everything changed when I was 16, and my parents went through a bitter divorce that divided not just their marriage but our family fortune. My father, Jonathan Mitchell, walked away with the bulk of the assets and relocated to Europe with his new girlfriend, leaving my mother, Elizabeth, struggling to maintain appearances on a fraction of what she was accustomed to. Our family structure revolved around my Uncle Richard, my father's older brother, who assumed the role of family patriarch after my grandfather passed. Richard hosted the annual family wealth conferences at his mansion in Connecticut, a tradition started by my grandfather to maintain family financial accountability, but which had devolved into a competition of who could flaunt the most wealth. Uncle Richard's wife, Aunt Vivian, was the unofficial scorekeeper of these events, her critical eye measuring everyone's worth by the labels they wore and the vacations they took. Then there were my cousins, Stephanie, Uncle Richard's daughter, who worked as an executive in his investment firm, and Brendan, who sold his tech startup for millions before he turned 30. Every family gathering became their stage to showcase new achievements, with my mother and me relegated to being the audience of their success stories. After graduating from Columbia with a business degree, I shocked everyone by declining both Uncle Richard's offer to join his firm and my cousin Brendan's invitation to work at his new tech venture. Instead, I took a job at a small urban planning consultancy firm, earning a solid but unimpressive salary. What my family didn't know was that I was learning everything about neighborhood development, zoning laws, and property valuation, knowledge that would prove invaluable. 5 years ago, I used my savings and a small inheritance from my maternal grandmother to purchase my first property, a rundown duplex in a transitional neighborhood that experts were eyeing for growth. I renovated it myself on weekends, rented both units, and used the income to secure my next investment. Each time I attended a family event in my sensible clothes and minimal jewelry, enduring comments about my modest lifestyle choices, I was secretly expanding my portfolio. My family had written me off as the cautionary tale they warned their children about, the once privileged Mitchell who couldn't maintain her status. The irony that I now owned the buildings many of them lived in was a secret I had kept close to my chest, until this year's family conference when everything would change. The invitation arrived in early October, its heavyweight cream envelope embossed with the Mitchell family crest, an ostentatious touch Uncle Richard had added in recent years. The annual Mitchell Family Financial Conference and Dinner, it announced in ornate gold lettering, with details for the November gathering at Richard's estate. I tossed it onto my kitchen counter next to the stack of property assessments I'd been reviewing. Last year's conference had been particularly uncomfortable. Cousin Stephanie had commented loudly on my brave choice to wear the same blazer I'd worn the previous year, while Aunt Vivian had pulled me aside to offer a gift card to Nordstrom for something suitable, as if my wardrobe were a charity case. I still remembered the burning humiliation when Uncle Richard introduced me to his business associates as my niece who's still finding her way, with a patronizing pat on my shoulder. My phone rang, displaying my mother's number. "Did you get the invitation?" she asked without preamble. Elizabeth Mitchell still maintained the polish and composure of her wealthy days, though her circumstances had changed dramatically. "I'm not going this year, Mom," I replied, flipping through reports of my latest acquisition. "Becca, you have to. Keeping these connections is important even when it's difficult." I could hear the strain in her voice. My mother had endured years of subtle degradation from her former in-laws, yet she persisted in maintaining family ties. "They don't respect either of us," Why subject ourselves to another round of their judgment? Because we are Mitchells too, she said simply, and running away only confirms what they think of us. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, contemplating the folder labeled Lexington Square Holdings. The universe had presented me with an unexpected opportunity. 3 weeks ago, my real estate alert system had notified me that the luxury apartment building housing Uncle Richard's pied-à-terre, cousin Stephanie's new penthouse, and apartments owned by 3 other family members was quietly being listed for sale. The international investment group that owned it was divesting their American properties due to regulatory changes. I had immediately contacted my financial team, leveraging the success of my existing portfolio to secure financing for my biggest acquisition yet. The closing was scheduled for 2 days before the family conference. I made my decision then, walking to my closet to select my outfit, not the designer clothes I could now easily afford, but a simple black dress and minimal jewelry. For 5 years, I had maintained my privacy, allowing my business to grow without family interference or connections. I had worked with neighborhood associations, ensuring my renovations improved communities rather than displacing residents. I had built relationships with local officials based on my reputation, not my family name. But perhaps it was time to stop hiding. I spent the next 3 weeks finalizing the Lexington Square purchase, working late into the night with lawyers, and reviewing documents. The complexity of the $60 million transaction was staggering, involving multiple financing sources and regulatory hurdles. The day before the closing, my primary lender almost pulled out, citing market volatility. I spent 8 frantic hours securing an alternative funding source, refusing to let this opportunity slip away. When the final documents were signed and the keys symbolically handed over, I asked my attorney to prepare one additional document, a clear, simplified overview of the ownership structure, with my name prominently displayed. The night before the conference, I printed the property deed and ownership contracts, placing them in a leather portfolio along with documentation of my other properties. For the first time since starting my business, I calculated my total net worth, a figure that even in my family would raise eyebrows. As I packed these documents into my modest handbag, I wondered if I was making the right decision. Was I revealing my success out of pride or as a necessary step toward authenticity with my family? Either way, tomorrow would change everything. Uncle Richard's estate loomed against the November sky like a monument to excess. 24,000 square feet of Connecticut real estate, with manicured gardens still green despite the season, maintained by heated soil systems he had boasted about last year. The circular driveway was already lined with vehicles that collectively represented the GDP of a small nation. Cousin Brendan's custom Tesla, Aunt Vivian's Bentley, and various other luxury cars belonging to family members. My Toyota Camry, though only 5 years old, looked comically out of place as the valet approached with a barely concealed expression of surprise. "Ms. Mitchell," he confirmed, clearly trying to reconcile my car with the mansion before him. I nodded, handing him my keys with a generous tip that made his eyes widen slightly. In the grand foyer, crystal chandeliers illuminated marble floors, as staff in formal attire circulated with champagne trays. Clusters of my relatives stood in conversational groups, most barely glancing my way as I entered. "Rebecca, you made it?" Aunt Vivian approached, air kissing near both my cheeks while her eyes performed their usual assessment of my appearance. "That's a practical choice for today," she commented, referencing my simple black dress. I noticed her Cartier bracelet caught the light as she gestured toward the main hall. "Everyone's just arriving. Your mother called to say she'll be a bit late." Across the room, Cousin Stephanie held court among several relatives, her fingers splayed to display an enormous cushion-cut diamond engagement ring. "Marcus proposed last month at our villa in Santorini," she was saying as I passed. "We're planning the wedding for June at the Vanderbilt estate. Did you hear I closed the McAllister acquisition last week? Daddy says it's the fastest negotiation in the company's history." Her eyes caught mine. "Oh, Rebecca, I didn't see you there. Love how you always keep things simple." Her fiancé, a square-jawed man with the confident posture of old money, barely acknowledged me with a nod. In another corner, Cousin Brendan was gesturing animatedly. Series C funding closed at $300 million, valuations through the roof. He paused when he saw me. "Rebecca, still at that urban planning place?" Good for you, having that stability. His condescension was thinly veiled as concern. I moved through the space, collecting similar interactions with relatives who either ignored me or offered backhanded compliments about my brave career choices and modest lifestyle. My mother arrived 30 minutes later, immediately scanning the room for me. Elizabeth Mitchell had maintained her elegance despite financial constraints. She wore a navy blue dress I recognized from previous years, accessorized differently, to appear new. "They're particularly insufferable today," she whispered as she hugged me. Stephanie cornered me to ask if we needed help with contributions to the family investment pool this year. The family investment pool was another of Uncle Richard's traditions, a collective fund for family members to join investment opportunities. The minimum buy-in was $50,000, a sum designed specifically to exclude those without substantial liquid assets. "I told her we'd discuss it during dinner," my mother continued, a flash of distress crossing her features. "I know we can't participate, but I couldn't bear her pity today." I squeezed her hand. "Don't worry about it, Mom." The weight of the property documents in my bag felt suddenly significant. Things might be different after tonight. Before she could question me, Uncle Richard's booming voice called everyone to attention. "Family, shall we proceed to the dining room? We have much to celebrate today." As the crowd moved toward the massive dining hall, I caught snippets of conversation around me. "Just sold the summer house in Nantucket for $7 million. Junior got early acceptance to Harvard. The new yacht will be delivered next month." Each statement seemed designed to be overheard, each achievement measured against an invisible scoreboard. I maintained my composure, the quiet certainty of what lay in my bag giving me a confidence I had never felt at these gatherings before. For the first time, I wasn't dreading my place at the Mitchell family table. The dining room could have comfortably seated 50, though our family gathering numbered just 23. A massive table stretched beneath another crystal chandelier, adorned with elaborate floral arrangements and fine china displaying the A. Mitchell family crest. Place cards positioned everyone strategically, the most favored family members nearest to Uncle Richard at the head of the table, with status diminishing as one moved farther away. I found my name at the far end, beside my mother and across from a distant cousin's new husband who wasn't yet deemed important enough for better placement. The servers moved with choreographed precision, presenting the first course, Maine lobster with gold leaf garnish, while sommeliers poured wines specifically selected for each dish. Uncle Richard stood, raising his glass. As is tradition, we gather to celebrate the Mitchell family's continued prosperity and success. Before we enjoy our meal, I'd like to continue another tradition, sharing our achievements since our last gathering. This was the moment I had come to dread each year, the formalized boasting session where each family member recounted their financial victories, acquisitions, and status symbols. Uncle Richard always began, setting the standard for impressive declarations. "Henderson Capital has exceeded $10 billion in managed assets this quarter," he announced, referencing his investment firm. "We've acquired 3 competing firms and expanded into Asian markets with offices in Singapore and Tokyo. Vivian and I have purchased another vacation property in Aspen, and we've commissioned a new wing for the Art Institute in our name." "Appreciative?" Murmurs rippled through the table as he sat. Aunt Vivian added casually, "We've also established a $2 million endowment for the symphony." Each family member took their turn, the achievements growing more elaborate with each announcement. Cousin Stephanie stood next, tossing her perfectly highlighted hair. "Besides closing the McAllister deal worth $800 million, I've been promoted to Executive Vice President of Acquisitions." She flashed her engagement ring. "Marcus and I have purchased the penthouse at Lexington Square. 3,000 square feet with panoramic city views. The renovations alone cost $600,000, but it's important to create the perfect home." I felt my heartbeat quicken at the mention of Lexington Square, maintaining a neutral expression as she continued, listing achievements. Cousin Brendan followed with details of his tech company's expansion. "We're disrupting the entire industry. The valuation has doubled since last year." He smirked in my direction. "I've also purchased a vacation property in Lake Como next to George Clooney's villa." Around the table, other relatives shared their promotions, bonuses, real estate purchases, and investment returns. My Uncle Robert described his new position on the board of a Fortune 500 company. My Aunt Patricia detailed her art collection's appreciation. Cousin William explained his hedge fund's performance. The ritual continued until all eyes turned expectantly toward my mother and me at the far end of the table. My mother spoke first, her voice steady despite the pressure. Elizabeth Mitchell, she introduced herself formally as was custom. I've increased my client list at the interior design firm, including 2 historical renovation projects. She maintained her dignity despite the contrast between her modest achievements and the extravagance preceding her. I could see Uncle Richard's dismissive nod, her contribution barely registering on the family's success meter. Then it was my turn, the traditional moment when I would offer something inconsequential while enduring patronizing smiles. This year, however, I sat silently, the portfolio in my bag suddenly heavy with potential. "Rebecca?" Uncle Richard prompted. "Do you have anything to share with the family this year?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Aunt Vivian interjected with a laugh. "Richard, don't put her on the spot. We know Rebecca has chosen a different path." Her words dripped with condescension, masked as understanding. "Not everyone prioritizes financial achievement." Several relatives exchanged knowing glances. I remained silent, watching the dynamic unfold, allowing the awkwardness to build as servers cleared plates and presented the main course, Japanese Wagyu beef with truffles. Uncle Richard, uncomfortable with my silence, attempted to move past me. "Well, we all make our choices. Some of us are simply more suited to the Mitchell family tradition of excellence." The comment elicited polite laughter around the table. My mother tensed beside me, her hand gripping her water glass tighter. I placed my hand on hers reassuringly, still saying nothing. The conversation shifted to other topics: private school, admissions, charity gala committees, and luxury vacation destinations. I ate quietly, listening as Cousin Stephanie described her penthouse renovations in excruciating detail, unaware that she was technically describing property I now owned. The original fixtures were only 5 years old but completely unsuitable. Italian marble makes such a difference in the master bath. As dessert was served, gold-flecked chocolate confections with imported French liqueur, I noticed the increasing glances in my direction. My silence had become conspicuous, creating an undercurrent of curiosity. I had never deviated from the script before, always playing my assigned role as the family underachiever. Tonight, the portfolio in my bag represented a dramatic rewriting of that narrative, and I was beginning to look forward to the third act. As coffee and digestives were served, Uncle Richard turned his attention back to me, his expression a calculated mixture of concern and superiority. "Rebecca, you've been unusually quiet tonight. Typically, you at least tell us about some community project or other." His words were carefully selected to diminish whatever I might share. "Nothing noteworthy to contribute to the family legacy this year?" The table quieted, attention focusing on our exchange. "Perhaps she's embarrassed," Aunt Vivian suggested, her voice lowered as if in confidence but deliberately audible to everyone. Not everyone can thrive in today's competitive landscape. I sipped my water, still saying nothing, watching as my silence made them increasingly uncomfortable. "I heard her consulting firm had layoffs," Cousin Stephanie said to no one in particular, examining her manicure. "Such a volatile industry." Cousin Brendan leaned forward. "You know, Rebecca, I could always find something for you at my company. Nothing high level, of course, but stable employment." His offer, presented as generosity, was another subtle reminder of the hierarchy. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "The Mitchell family has always taken care of its own. If you're in financial difficulty, Rebecca, you only need to ask." The insinuation hung in the air. I was the charity case, the failure requiring family assistance. My mother attempted to intervene. "Rebecca is doing perfectly fine." "Elizabeth," Uncle Richard interrupted, "we all know the challenges you both have faced. There's no shame in accepting help." He turned to the table at large. "Rebecca can't even afford a house in this market. 32 years old and still renting. In this family." Laughter rippled through the gathering, some genuine, some uncomfortable. "The Mitchell name used to mean something," he continued. "Financial acumen was in our blood. I sometimes wonder what happened with Rebecca." "Different priorities," Aunt Vivian offered sympathetically. "Not everyone is cut out for real success." Cousin Stephanie nodded in agreement. Some people just aren't comfortable with wealth and status. It's almost like Rebecca's rejecting her heritage. The conversation continued around me as if I weren't present, analyzing my perceived failures and psychological aversion to success. Theories were exchanged about where my development had gone wrong. Was it the divorce? My education? Perhaps I simply lacked the Mitchell ambition gene. My mother's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as she attempted again to defend me, only to be talked over by Uncle Richard. "It's our responsibility to help poor Rebecca," he announced, the emphasis on poor drawing more chuckles. "Perhaps we should create a position for her at Henderson Capital, something appropriate to her capabilities." The condescension was no longer subtle. I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest, the same humiliation I'd swallowed at every family gathering for years. But this time, something had changed. The documents in my bag represented a new reality, one where their perceptions were not just wrong, but laughably misinformed. I straightened in my chair, the movement subtle but noticeable enough that several relatives glanced my way. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my typical response, embarrassed acceptance of their assessment, perhaps with a weak attempt to defend my choices. Instead, I smiled, reaching for my bag. The moment for revelation had arrived, and I found myself surprisingly calm as years of accumulated frustration crystallized into perfect clarity. "You know," I finally spoke, my voice steady and confident, "I've been listening to everyone share their achievements tonight, and it's impressive." The table fell silent, all eyes turning to me with expressions ranging from surprise to curiosity to condescension. "Uncle Richard," I continued, maintaining direct eye contact with him, "you mentioned financial acumen being in our blood. I've actually found that to be true in my case as well, though perhaps not in the way the family typically recognizes." I reached into my bag and removed my leather portfolio, placing it on the table before me. "For the past 5 years, I've been building a real estate investment company that takes a different approach from the family's traditional methods." Aunt Vivian exchanged a glance with Uncle Richard, her expression skeptical. "How lovely, dear. A little side business." "Not exactly little," I replied, opening the portfolio. "Mitchell Urban Renaissance has acquired 37 properties across 3 states, focusing on undervalued buildings in transitional neighborhoods." Cousin Brendan snorted. "What, like duplexes in bad areas? That's hardly—" "Our portfolio currently includes 8 apartment buildings, 3 mixed-use developments, 2 office complexes, and various smaller properties," I continued calmly. "Our most recent quarterly valuation places the company's total assets at just over $120 million. A beat of silence followed my statement. Uncle Richard's eyebrows rose slightly before his expression settled back into skepticism. "Rebecca, that's a very specific claim. Are you suggesting you've been secretly running a substantial real estate empire while driving a Toyota and living in a 1-bedroom apartment?" His tone made it clear he found the idea absurd. Several relatives chuckled, though the laughter seemed less certain than before. I removed the first document, a certified financial statement prepared by one of the country's most respected accounting firms. "My company operates on a principle that I believe the Mitchell family has forgotten. True wealth isn't what you display, it's what you build." I slid the document toward the center of the table. "My personal net worth, separate from the company, valuation, currently stands at $38 million. Cousin Stephanie's smirk faltered as she leaned forward to glimpse the document. "This can't be right. You wear the same clothes year after year. Your watch is from Macy's." "I reinvest most profits back into the business," I explained. "And I've found that dressing modestly gives me an advantage in negotiations. People tend to underestimate you." I looked directly at her as I said this, and she had the grace to flush slightly. Uncle Richard had retrieved the financial statement and was examining it closely, his brow furrowed. "These figures, if they're accurate," he began, his voice betraying the first hint of uncertainty. "They're accurate," I confirmed, "and independently verified. I'd be happy to introduce you to my financial team." I removed additional documents from my portfolio: property deeds, investment returns, and business projections. Unlike the family approach of using wealth primarily for status and luxury, my company partners with community organizations and local businesses to revitalize neighborhoods ethically. I passed photos of before and after renovations around the table. We maintain affordable units in all our buildings and provide business incubator spaces for local entrepreneurs. The table had gone completely silent, the earlier mockery replaced by growing confusion and disbelief. My mother watched with wide eyes, clearly as surprised as everyone else. I had never shared the full extent of my success with her, wanting to establish my business firmly before making any announcements. But this would require significant starting capital, Uncle Robert noted, his financial mind quickly grasping the implications. Where did you get your initial investment? I used my savings and a small inheritance from grandmother Elaine to purchase my first property. After renovating it myself on weekends, I leveraged that asset for the next acquisition. No family. Connections. No Mitchell name opening doors. I looked pointedly at Cousin Stephanie. Just strategic investments and a lot of hard work. Uncle Richard seemed to recover his composure, though his voice lacked its earlier condescension. I'd need to see more documentation before accepting these claims. Anyone can create impressive-looking financial statements. His skepticism was expected. The Mitchell family measured success not just in dollars, but in visible trappings of wealth. My modest lifestyle contradicted everything they believed about success. I understand your skepticism, I replied, removing another document from my portfolio. Perhaps this most recent acquisition will help clarify things. I held up a property deed that would change the dynamics of the family forever, waiting a moment before revealing its significance. The room seemed to hold its breath as I prepared to deliver the final piece of evidence that would transform me from family disappointment to something they never expected. This, I said, holding up the document for everyone to see, is the property deed and ownership contract for Lexington Square. The sleek luxury building in the heart of the financial district was immediately recognizable to everyone at the EAA table. I completed the purchase 2 days ago. Cousin Stephanie was the first to react, her voice rising an octave. That's impossible. Lexington Square is owned by Gramercy International Holdings. I just finalized the purchase of my penthouse last month. Gramercy International sold their entire American portfolio due to regulatory changes in their home country, I explained, sliding the contract toward her. Mitchell Urban Renaissance, operating through Summit Acquisition Partners, purchased the building for $64 million. The transaction details were clearly visible on the document. My signature on the final line. You're lying, Stephanie stammered, though her fingers trembled as she reached for the contract. This is some kind of twisted joke. I assure you, it's not, I replied calmly. In fact, technically speaking, you didn't purchase your penthouse. You signed a 99-year lease with ownership rights. The building itself belongs to my company now. The silence that followed was absolute. Uncle Richard had risen partially from his chair, his complexion reddening as he stared at the document Stephanie was clutching. Let me see that, he demanded, extending his hand. My cousin reluctantly passed it to him. Uncle William leaned toward Uncle Richard. Is that legitimate? Can this be verified? Uncle Richard's eyes scanned the document, his extensive business experience allowing him to quickly assess its authenticity. When he looked up, the disbelief in his expression was evident. The signatures appear genuine. The notarization is from Blackwell and Morris. He named one of the most prestigious law firms in the city, one the family often used themselves. If this is accurate, he didn't finish the sentence, looking at me with new eyes. Not only Stephanie's penthouse, I continued, but your pied-à-terre on the 18th floor, Uncle Richard. And Cousin William's investment property on the 12th. Aunt Patricia's daughter's condo on the 20th. And the corporate apartment Henderson Capital maintains for visiting executives. I had memorized every family-connected unit in the building. You've all been my tenants for nearly a month now. Aunt Vivian found her voice. But this is strategic business, I supplied. Lexington Square has excellent bones but was poorly managed. We've already identified ways to increase its value while maintaining its luxury status. Cousin Brendan had been unusually quiet, studying me with a calculating expression. You've been planning this, haven't you? Buying the building where family members live just to make some point? His accusation contained a hint of admiration beneath the resentment. Actually, no, I answered truthfully. When the opportunity arose, I evaluated the property on its merits like any other investment. The fact that family members occupied units was coincidental, though I admit it does make today's revelation more dramatic. I couldn't help the small smile that formed. Business is business, after all. Isn't that what you've all taught me? Uncle Richard had regained some of his composure, though the power dynamic had visibly shifted. Why maintain the deception? Why live as if you were struggling financially when you could have been acknowledged for your success? The question revealed so much about his worldview, that the purpose of wealth was recognition and status, that success unwitnessed was barely success at all. Because I learned something valuable watching this family, I replied. When people know you have money, they treat you differently. They want things from you, they make assumptions. My business flourished precisely because I wasn't recognized as a wealthy Mitchell. I negotiated better deals. I worked directly with community members who would have been suspicious of a visibly rich developer. I built authentic relationships. I looked around the table. And I got to see who truly valued me as a person versus who only values wealth and status. The implications of my statement hung in the air. Aunt Vivian attempted to recover, her social instincts kicking in. Well, this is wonderful news. We've always known you had potential, Rebecca. You're a Mitchell, after all. Her pivot was so blatant it drew uncomfortable glances from several relatives. Fascinating approach, Uncle Robert commented, his analytical mind already accepting and adjusting to the new information. Unconventional, but clearly effective. Others began chiming in, attempting to align themselves with my newly revealed success. The very relatives who had dismissed me minutes earlier now sought to establish that they had always believed in me, had always seen my potential. Uncle Richard remained silent, still processing the reversal of his long-held narrative about me. I turned to my mother, whose eyes were filled with tears, not of embarrassment now, but of pride and vindication. For years she had defended me against family criticism, believing in me when everyone else had written me off. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I wanted to tell you, I said quietly, but I needed to establish everything securely first. She nodded, understanding, without words. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the Mitchell family had been fundamentally disrupted. The relatives who had positioned themselves as the successful ones, those closest to Uncle Richard at the table, were recalibrating their understanding of where I fit in the family structure. And I realized, watching their reactions, that, while I had craved this validation for years, it now meant surprisingly little. My success existed whether they acknowledged it or not. Their approval or disapproval had become irrelevant to my sense of self-worth. That realization was, perhaps, the most valuable asset I'd acquired in my journey. The formal dinner dissolved into chaos after my revelation. Some relatives huddled in corners, whispering urgently while checking their phones, likely verifying my claims. Others approached me directly, their manner transformed from condescension to keen interest. Uncle Richard eventually gathered himself, approaching me with an expression I'd never seen him direct at me before, a mixture of surprise, respect, and calculation. "You've been extraordinarily resourceful, Rebecca," he said, his tone carefully modulated. "The family has clearly underestimated you." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture previously reserved for family members he considered successful. "We should discuss potential synergies between Henderson Capital and your company, perhaps a joint venture." I smiled politely. "I'm always open to discussing legitimate business opportunities, Uncle Richard. My office can set up a meeting with your team." The formality of my response wasn't lost on him. I was establishing boundaries, making it clear that any future relationship would be professional rather than based on family obligation. His eyes narrowed slightly before he nodded. "Of course. I'll have my assistant contact yours." Cousin Stephanie approached next, her earlier mockery replaced by barely concealed anger. "You bought Lexington Square to embarrass me, didn't you?" she accused, keeping her voice low but intense. After I announced my penthouse purchase last month, you deliberately targeted the building. The Lexington Square acquisition began 4 months ago, I replied calmly. Your announcement had nothing to do with it. Business isn't personal for me, Stephanie. She flinched at the implicit criticism that for her, business was indeed personal, a means of status and competition. So what happens now? She demanded. Are you going to evict us all? Change the terms of our agreements? I could see the real fear beneath her hostility. Fear that I would use my position to exact revenge for years of mistreatment. All existing contracts will be honored, I assured her. The only changes will be improvements to building management and amenities. Your home is secure. The relief in her expression was quickly masked by renewed defensiveness. I suppose you expect gratitude now? I expect a professional landlord-tenant relationship, I corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. Across the room, my mother was surrounded by relatives who had previously barely acknowledged her existence. Now they sought details about my business, as if she had been privy to secrets they'd missed. I watched her navigate their sudden attention with grace, neither gloating nor revealing how deeply their past behavior had hurt her. Cousin Brendan cornered me by the dessert table, his entrepreneurial mind already adapting to the new reality. You know, I've been looking to diversify into real estate, he began, his tone conspiratorial. With my tech background and your property experience, we could create something disruptive. Smart buildings, AI-managed properties, the possibilities are endless. An interesting proposition, I acknowledged. Though I noticed you weren't interested in collaborating when you thought I was struggling. His smile faltered. Business is about identifying opportunity. You understand that better than anyone, apparently. I do, I agreed. Which is why I carefully select partners who value my expertise regardless of appearances. I handed him my business card. If you have a serious proposal, my team reviews potential partnerships quarterly. Throughout the evening, I navigated similar conversations, some apologetic, others opportunistic, all marked by a fundamental shift in how family members perceived me. Aunt Vivian made a point of telling anyone who would listen that she had always seen Rebecca's potential and was so proud of her independence. Uncle Robert, the most analytically minded of my relatives, asked thoughtful questions about my business model and investment criteria. Your approach is unorthodox, but clearly effective, he noted with genuine respect. The family could learn from your community-focused strategy. Around midnight, as guests began departing, I found a quiet moment with my mother on the terrace overlooking Uncle Richard's elaborate gardens. Why didn't you tell me? She asked simply. I would have kept your secret. I needed to establish everything on my own terms, I explained. And honestly, I wasn't sure how it would all turn out. The business was growing, but tonight could have gone very differently. Are you satisfied now? She asked, studying my expression carefully. Now that they know who you really are? I considered her question, watching the distant lights of departing luxury cars. I realized something tonight, Mom. I thought I wanted their validation, their acknowledgement that I'm successful by even their excessive standards. But when it finally happened, it felt hollow. Because true validation comes from within, she said softly. Something I tried to teach you when you were young. I smiled, remembering her lessons about self-worth that had often been drowned out by the louder voices of the Mitchell success ideology. You were right, as usual. She squeezed my hand. I am incredibly proud of what you've built, Rebecca. Not because of the dollar amount, but because you did it with integrity and purpose. Her approval meant more than the combined recognition of everyone else at the gathering. As we prepared to leave, Uncle Richard approached us one final time. Rebecca, he began, his tone more genuine than I'd ever heard from him. I misjudged you. We all did. For a moment, vulnerability showed through his carefully maintained facade of patriarchal authority. The Mitchell legacy is clearly safe in your hands, though not in the way I expected. It was as close to an apology as he was capable of offering. I nodded, accepting the olive branch without completely forgetting the years of dismissal, and Humiliation. Good night, Uncle Richard. I'm sure we'll be in touch. As my mother and I walked toward the valet stand, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret I'd carried was now in the open, and while the family dynamics had been irrevocably altered, I was surprised to find that I felt neither triumphant nor vindictive. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Freedom from seeking approval I no longer needed. 3 weeks after the family conference, I sat in my office reviewing plans for our newest acquisition, a former warehouse being converted to affordable artists' lofts and community exhibition space. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city skyline, including the distinctive silhouette of Lexington Square in the distance. My assistant knocked softly before entering. "Your mother is here?" she announced with a smile. Since the revelation at the family dinner, I had moved my mother into a beautiful apartment in one of my first renovated buildings and offered her a position as design consultant for our residential properties, roles she had accepted with dignity and enthusiasm. Elizabeth entered, looking more relaxed and confident than I'd seen her in years. "The Henderson Capital meeting is confirmed for next week," she informed me, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Richard has been calling daily to discuss partnership opportunities." She raised an eyebrow. "He's never pursued a business connection this aggressively." I nodded, unsurprised. Uncle Richard's world had been shaken by the discovery that the family hierarchy wasn't as fixed as he had believed. "I'll hear him out, but I'm not giving up control of what I've built." My phone chimed with another message from cousin Stephanie, the 5th this week. After her initial anger, she had shifted to attempting to rebuild our relationship, suggesting lunches and shopping trips as if years of condescension could be erased with shared appetizers and retail therapy. I had responded politely but maintained my distance, allowing time to reveal whether her interest in reconciliation was genuine or merely strategic. The family dynamic had shifted dramatically. Invitations to exclusive events now regularly appeared in my inbox. Relatives who had previously ignored me at gatherings now called to catch up and inquire about my business insights. Uncle Richard had even suggested I take a leadership role in the annual family conference planning committee, an inner circle position previously reserved for those he considered the most successful Mitchells. While part of me appreciated the validation, I found myself surprisingly detached from the family's newfound approval. The respect and recognition I had craved for so long meant little now that I understood its conditional nature. True satisfaction came from what I had built and the positive impact my business was creating in previously neglected communities. I had used my wealth to establish a foundation providing business education and microloans to women entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The first cohort of 30 women had recently graduated from our program, each with a viable business plan and initial funding. Watching them succeed brought a fulfillment that no family validation could match. My mother studied me thoughtfully. "You seem different since the conference, more settled." "I think I finally realized that I don't need their approval," I replied. For years, I measured myself against their definition of success, even while rejecting it. Now I'm free to define success on my own terms. She smiled. "That's the most valuable asset you could acquire, that freedom from external validation." We spent the afternoon reviewing plans for the foundation's expansion, our conversation flowing easily between business strategy and personal reflections. As the sun began to set, painting the city's skyline in golden light, I contemplated how far I had come from the insecure family member desperate for recognition. My journey had taught me that true wealth wasn't measured in property deeds or bank balances, but in the impact we create and the integrity with which we build our lives. The Mitchell family would continue its tradition of measuring worth through acquisitions and status symbols. I would continue building my business with different values, focusing on community impact alongside profit. Perhaps some family members would eventually understand my approach. Others never would. And I had finally reached a place where either outcome was acceptable. What's your experience with family expectations? Have you ever been underestimated by relatives who later had to reconsider their judgment? Share your story in the comments below. If you found value in my journey from family underdog to independent success, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about redefining success on your own terms. Remember, true wealth isn't what you display, it's what you build with purpose and integrity. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to follow your own path, even when others don't yet understand its direction.